Hello, everybody. So, my name is LaPretty, and I am the Dominican Voodoo Spiritualist. And today I'm going to be doing the movie review on the excellent movie named Sinners. I love everything about this movie. Ryan Coogler did an excellent job writing this movie, creating this movie, and directing this movie. And every actor that he picked and casted for this movie was the best choice that he could have ever made when casting the cast for this movie. Before I saw this movie, there was a lot of controversy online, a lot of conflict online, a lot of back and forth about Christian people saying that this movie is demonic, that this movie is of the devil, that this movie is not of God, blah, 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 blah. They made this movie seem really, really bad. And what made me want to go see it, I said, you know what? I want to see this movie for what it is instead of just going based off of what other people are saying. Because a lot of times people can talk a lot of crap about movies and people and just things in life and be 100% wrong, or they can only be speaking from a one-sided perspective. And so sometimes instead of you just riding off of what someone says, it's just best to see it for yourself. And that's what I did. So when I saw this movie, it was great. It was excellent. And I loved everything about this movie. The reason why I love this movie is because it authentically portrayed and showcased African spirituality, hoodoo, and African American culture. I love how authentic this movie was. I love how real this movie was. And I loved how graphic it was in like the historical contexts, the cultural contexts, the language, the history. And I love how the movie just glided. It's like you didn't really have to think too much about what was occurring, what was going on, what this meant, what that meant. It's like as soon as the movie started, they said it, they did it, and you just went along, each scene of the movie. So it was an easy watch. Now, when I was watching the movie, I did notice a lot of spiritual contexts and spiritual symbolism within the movie. And that's what I loved about this movie. I did see an interview where they were interviewing Michael B. Jordan, who plays the twins, Smoke and Stack. And a woman, the interviewer asked him, so what does the B stand for in your name? His name is Michael B. Jordan. He said, well, I'm a Babalawo. But then he went on to, talk about the other reasons for why his middle initial is B. And I said, wait a minute, a Babalawo? I said, what? Like, yeah, he said a Babalawo. So if you guys don't know what a Babalawo is a Ifa priest. Ifa is the Yoruban religion that comes from the Yoruba tribe in Nigeria, and Ifa is the parent religion of the children religions known as Isheshe and Santeria. So since Michael B. Jordan said that he is a Babalawo, or like we call a Baba, he is a Ifa priest. And Ifa priests are a big deal in Yoruban culture in Nigeria, but they're also a very big deal in African spirituality traditions in the diaspora. And I say traditions and in the diaspora because when you are a high priest of any African traditional religion, you are highly thought of and highly respected. Because with the priests and priestesses, that's where the knowledge starts and that's where it continues because they're the ones who are the originators of the religion. They're given all the secrets, all the power, and all the authority, and they're like the mouthpiece of the religion. So they pretty much tell the stories, the lineage, the heritage, and the steps of how to do things the correct way as far as African traditional religions. But if you're a Babalawo or an Iyanifa, which is a Ifa priestess, then you're pretty much the mouthpiece and you're pretty much the guide and the teacher of the Ifa tradition or the Ifa belief system or the Ifa religion. So yeah, I said, okay, Mr. Babalawo, Mr. Baba. Okay, so I thought that was, a good, insight on Michael B. Jordan, and that lets me know that that is why Ryan Coogler chose him to play Stack and Smoke, but also why he chose him to play in Black Panther and Wakanda Forever, because Black Panther and Wakanda Forever they were one of many of the movies that Ryan Coogler made, wrote, and directed because they once again authentically depicted the many different African traditions and cultures and nationalities. They told the stories of African Americans and Africans, and they also told the story of the relationship at the time because Black Panther came out of what 2017, 18, and it authentically depicted without really saying too much the history and the relationship between African Americans and Africans, and how we correlate, how we don't get along, how we're not seen, African Americans are not seen as real Africans by Africans, or how Africans are not respected by African Americans, and so on and so forth. So I really love how Ryan Coogler keeps it real when it comes to depicting African American culture and the experiences and the history and the day-to-day encounters that African Americans have with other nationalities and other groups in the African diaspora, or African lineage heritage based diaspora. So let's get down to the movie and see what we, not we. Okay, so now I'm going to get down to the movie and talk about the spiritual symbolism and the context that I saw within the Sinners movie. So the first thing that I noticed is that you had the twins. You had the twins Smoke and Stack. And as soon as I saw Smoke and Stack, I saw Ilegwa and Eshu. So, Ilegwa is the Orisha in the Santeria religion, and Santeria is also known as Relede Osha or Lukumi. And the Orisha Ilegwa or Ilegba is the Orisha of the gatekeeper, the road opener, the beginning and the end, night and day, old and new. And he's highly revered and respected in the Santeria tradition. And when we go to Ilegwa, he is known as the first Orisha that we go to because he's the gatekeeper and the road opener to not only our paths, but to gain access to the other Orishas in the Orisha pantheon. But when I saw Smoke and Stack, I saw Ilegba or Ilegwa and Eshu. The reason why I see Smoke as Ilegba is because he represents Ilegba as a older man, as a wise man, as someone who's cool-headed, level-headed, confident, very, understanding, non-conceited, non-arrogant, but very stern. Because in the Lukumi tradition, when we go to Ilegba, he'll be one-on-one with you. He'll listen to you. He'll talk to you and whatnot, but he's very stern in how he delegates what he's going to do or what he's not going to do or how he's going to handle a situation. Because as you guys can see, when it came to Smoke and Stack, they were who they were individually, but they didn't play with nobody. Like they don't let you, get over on them. They don't let you ride over on them. They don't let you put them down or nothing. They will be quick to shoot and ask questions later if they even sniffed or hinted or got the hint that you were about to take advantage of them or try to do something to them. So they were very sharp in how they, perceived people and what they knew or what they thought their next move was going to be. And that's how Ilegba is. When you go to Ilegba, you sit down and you talk to him about how you would like for him to open up your roads and how you would like for him to bring you in new opportunities and new chances. But the thing about Ilegba is that he can be vengeful because we do go to Ilegba for reversals. So if you've been wrong, somebody has came at you, you can go to Ilegwa and say, hey, this person was talking to me crazy, or this person, gypped me out of some money, or this person hurt me, or put something on me. And you can go to Electwa and say, I need for you to, spin the block on them. I need for you to, tap dance on that for a minute. I need for you to spin the block on them about what they did to me because it was wrong. And when Electwa sees that what you're saying is right and it's just, he'll turn it around, he'll work it in your favor, he'll spin the block on your enemies as well. And I felt like that's what the twins, Smoke and Stack, represented. Now, Stack to me represents Eshu. Eshu is like the demon side, the devilish side, or like the wild side of Elegwa, because Elegwa is a two-sided spirit. He's good and bad. He's good and evil. The beginning and the end, night and day. Elegba is seen as day. Eshu is seen as night. Elect Ba is seen as good, Eshu is seen as bad. So with Eshu is a very wild and rambunctious, part of Elegwa, and Eshu is not served in the house. We serve him outside and we give him scraps of food to eat off of outside of our, front doors to tame his spirit because that's how wild he is. Because Eshu is too wild to withhold or contain in the closed atmosphere or like in a closed environment or in the house. So Eshu is served outside. With Stack, he's like Issue. He's hot, he's vivacious, he's very strong, he's very chaotic in his own sense, but he knows how to bring it together when it's time to. But other than that, he likes to have fun. He likes to do whatever he wants to do, whether it makes sense to anybody. He sees himself as a grown man. He got his money, he got his ways, he got his life, and he can do what he sees fit. And can't nobody tell him nothing. And so that's what makes me think about Issue because Issue is just like Stack. So I liked how Issue and Elegwa were both represented with Smoke and Stack because I felt like they authentically depicted the Orisha, Elegwa, and Issue. And I also liked how they had their hats color coordinated, where Stack's hat was red and like Smoke's hat was blue. Blue in spirituality represents balance, it represents communication, it represents bridging the gaps and, getting over hurdles and different obstacles. And that's the kind of dude that Smoke was. Now, when it comes to Stack, red represents, war, anger, passion, authority, force, strength, and power, but it can also represent lust and sexuality and, wild and vivaciousness and virility. Because even when you look at the spirits like the Oguns or like Shango or Danto and whatnot, their colors or their main color is red, or one of their colors is red. And when you look at their energies are very hot, or their energies are very, courageous and vivacious and warlike. And that's pretty much the energy that Stack had. He was very, I'm ready. Whatever comes with it, I'm ready for it. So that's pretty much what I saw with Smoke and Stack. Another spiritual symbolism that I noticed in the movie was the crossroads. When Stack and Smoke bought the juke joint, storefront or the juke joint store from the lead of the Klansmen or the lead of whatever town they were in that sold them the land and the property and the juke joint, it was at a crossroads because if you notice the area where they bought the juke joint at, there's like a tall stick that has like a cross at the top. And to me, that represented the crossroads. In spirituality, the crossroads represents making decisions, trying to figure out where to go, whether you should stay or leave, or whether you should enter or, leave. But crossroads, once again, represents Elegba or Papa Legba or Elegba and Eshu because it's a road opener, it's a gatekeeper, it's where you open up roads and open up doors to new opportunities. So I thought that was symbolic where they bought the juke joint and bought the land at a crossroads when the crossroads symbolizes new beginnings and road openings and opening up new opportunities and possibilities and businesses. So I thought that was good. Another thing that was pointed out in the movie was when the Klansman's nephew was living in his little like shanty house, shack house, or whatnot with the wife. And the scraggly little man that they didn't know was a vampire came and started banging on the door and saying, hey, I need help. Take me in, take me in. Little did they know he was a vampire, but they let him in anyway to be a quote unquote good Samaritan. And when they did that, the Native Americans showed up. And they were pretty much saying, have you seen such and such? If you see him, make sure that you tell us or send him our way because we're going to know what to do with him. Because if this man is allowed to go wherever he pleases, it's not going to be good for society. But one thing that I did notice was that when the sun started to set, they looked up and they said, oh, okay, well, we got to go. But just remember what I said, but we're going to go now. And they galloped up the road. To me, that represented sundown towns. if you don't know what a sundown town is, and sundown towns are very prevalent even today, sundown towns are towns that are ruled or ran by the Ku Klux Klan. And during the day, that's when people of color can roam and do what they please. But as soon as the sun sets, that's when the Klan can run and do as they please, especially run and do as they please with people of color. And so as soon as the sun set or sun was starting to set, they knew, okay, it's time to leave because this is a sundown town. Because once the sun goes down, that's when everybody wants to play around with us. So I kind of figured that, that's what it represented, was a sundown town. So that was symbolic because even though we live in 2025, sundown towns are still prevalent, and you do still have cases, especially of black men, wandering or working, or they somehow end up coming in contact with a sundown town and they end up becoming lynched. So I thought that was a good, add in the movie because that's something that's still prevalent today. Let's see. Another thing that I did like was Annie. I did not like how so many people said that Annie represented Mammy or Aunt Jemima. I'm like, what in the world made y'all think that Annie was some type of Mammy or some type of Aunt Jemima? Like, y'all don't even know what a Mammy or Aunt Jemima is if you think that that's Annie, because Annie show us ain't that. She is not that. Annie is an authentic hoodoo conjure woman. That is what you call a hoodoo conjure woman, not some mammy, not some Aunt Jemima. Because I'm gonna tell y'all what a mammy is. Even the term mammy, Aunt Jemima, actually came from the stereotype that was cultivated and created by racist white people on television. Because yes, slavery did happen, slavery was real. And yes, a lot of the older, slave women that may have had children, may have not had children, they somehow, ended up becoming the house slave or the housemaid, and they cooked, cleaned, and took care of the slave master's children as well as their own kids. And they fed the children, clothed them, nursed them, taught them how to read and live life, and pretty much become a productive citizen. Because some slave women probably taught the slave children better than their own slave master, mama, and daddy did. But the reason why they were called a mammy is because, white folks didn't really respect black people back then, when slavery was prevalent, and even when we were first depicted on TV. They always made sure to make, black women look bad by always having the extremely dark skinned women. And this is no offense, to dark skinned women, because dark skinned women are beautiful. But, back then they always portrayed dark skin as being a criminal, or as something bad, or as something evil, or as something wicked. So that's what they thought dark skin or someone who had black skin, represented. So they always made sure, the black woman was dark skinned, heavy set, unattractive, only good enough to be a maid and used and pushed around. And they called her a mammy because she was acting like somebody's mama or mammy by running around the house, cooking and cleaning and taking care of somebody else's kids. So that's pretty much what a mammy is. Annie show as heck ain't that. She was not running around some slave master's house, taking care of his babies and nursing his babies to sleep, cooking and cleaning for no slave master, man or woman. She had her own business in the neighborhood or in the area that they were in. She was a well respected woman in the area or in the neighborhood that they were in the movie. And people came to her for advice. Like Annie was a authentic hoodoo conjure woman. She had her own conjure shop with her amulets, mojo bags, gree bags, candles, potions, oils, whatever it was she had it. And the thing that I liked was how opposite her and Smoke were, because you don't really see this a lot in life. You do, but you don't see it celebrated a lot. You always see women that are deemed as extremely unattractive or as odd, especially, with somebody who is like in a Michael B. Jordan and, any type of scenario. People always think that women who look like, the actress that played Annie, because we have to remember real people are playing these characters. A lot of times people think that someone who looks like the actress who played Annie cannot get an actor who looks like Michael B. Jordan. They feel like she's only deserving to be with somebody who looks like Shrek, who looks like Jason with the mask off, who looks like Chucky after he done been burnt and all crudted and crusted up from being in all them different accidents, and all those movies he was in. They figure that since Annie is a ugly or unattractive woman, that she needs to be with an equally unattractive or ugly man. And I don't even think Ryan Coogler even paired Annie and Smoke together based on looks or whatever the case may be. I felt like he did it to represent an authentic relationship and a compatible relationship and a relationship that made sense to the movie or to the story. Because the one thing I kind of didn't know until I did research on my own after watching the movie is that Smoke and Stack were World War I veterans. So they knew what it was like to be in combat, to be in war, to know how to defend themselves, to know how to take commands, to know how to give commands, and to know structure and order. But the thing that I liked is how Smoke, he was very level headed, a people person, down to earth, but he was a war vet. And his wife, Annie, is, a hoodoo conjure woman. And at that time, and even today, conjure women are very well respected. If you don't know what hoodoo is the Southeast African American folk religion. It pretty much was cultivated from the African traditions that were brought over by the slaves and assimilated Christianity that the slaves had to assimilate to in order to live and thrive and survive during slavery. But Hoodoo conjure women like Annie, they still exist and are still prevalent today. They are highly respected women. They're not seen as some slave mammy or as some Aunt Jemima or whatnot. They're seen as a real respectable woman, someone who's seen as a priestess in her own way. They call them hoodoo conjure women or hoodoo mamas and whatnot. And these roles require real initiations and rites that have to be given in order for you to hold that title or hold that role. And I didn't know until the woman revealed herself that the woman who created the company known as House of Hoodoo, that was once a store in New Orleans, but there's no longer a store due to the scandal that happened between her and her husband. But the woman who created this company, and her name is Jessica Winston, she was the expert that Ryan Coogler called on to guide the actors and actresses and to guide him as far as proper and authentic hoodoo depictions within the movie. So they had the facts, they had the research, they had the evidence, they had the receipts. So they had bona fide people on staff teaching and telling them real hoodoo so that it was authentically depicted in the movie. And my thing is with this whole issue that a lot of Christians had with sinners, and this is just my opinion. I honestly feel as though a lot of Christians are jealous of people who practice African traditional religions because they see how our stuff or our beliefs produce results more so than Christianity does for some people, or how it gains so much profit from business or from rituals and, different workings that are performed and whatnot for us to be successful. Or they hate how it's so commercialized or popularized or so heavily depicted in mainstream media or modern day culture. And so I feel like, a lot of Christians sometimes can be a little, hateful and a little jealous and stuff sometimes because they see how our stuff works and they see how profitable it is and how popular it is and how people gravitate towards it or how people want to become involved in it. Because no matter what anybody says, and I'm so sick and tired of this, with with African Americans in the community, is that we have a culture and we have a belief system just like all the other cultures. And then I kind of get tired of how like other races want to demonize black people for, believing in other African traditional religions outside of hoodoo. Because when it's all said and done, we're black. Our blood comes from West Africa. Our blood comes from Nigeria, Ghana, the Republic of the Congo, um, Togo, what's some other African countries? Angola. Like our heritage, it spans through so many different West African countries that a lot of these African traditional religions came from. Benin, for example, is the birthplace of voodoo. If Benin didn't exist, you wouldn't have Haitian voodoo, Dominican voodoo, Puerto Rican voodoo, or New Orleans voodoo if it wasn't for Beninian voodoo that came from Benin, which is a small country in Africa. So, black people just gonna have to get over this, when it comes to us not being Christian, us not believing or practicing, because this is our roots, this is our heritage, this is in our lineage. So, you can't fight what's in you. Now, if you believe in Christianity and if it works for you, that's fine. But if you want to convert people to Christianity, bashing other people's religions and trying to make other religions look bad and look, wicked and whatnot, that's not the way to do it. So moving right along. Now, in the scene when the vampire was allowed in the house, he ate the husband, he ate the wife, and they became vampires. So boom, that's how that happened. Now, moving along to the cameos. So throughout the movie, we this the movie now, Smoke and Stack, they were big time, business people in Chicago. They made it big, they made a lot of money and they came from, a small town in Mississippi where they grew up and knew a lot of people that heard of them, from what they did in the streets and whatnot, but also what they did, in society as far as, business is concerned and whatnot. So they had a lot of respect within the city and within the town in Mississippi. And, going through the rest of the movie, we saw the Chinese people that they knew that, owned the grocery store that they had to get, a lot of things from to build the juke joint. But I love the cameos. Now, y'all know when it comes to like throwback, music videos and movies and whatnot, especially when it comes to Black culture, cameos was the thing to do back then. Like if you are a 90s kid or grew up in the 90s, you know what I'm talking about. Most 90s sitcoms, they had a singer that was popular, from the R&B world, or hip hop world, or even the gospel world. There was always a music video. They had like your favorite actors or actresses popping up from like your favorite sitcoms from the 90s. And I love how he incorporated that, because if you guys don't know Omar Miller played Cornbread, who was like the bouncer of the juke joint, but he was also in the movie 8 Mile with Eminem. And I think he played in a lot of other movies throughout the early 2000s as well. And then you have Mr. Delroy Lindo, who played Delta Slim. And if you guys don't know who Delroy Lindo is, he's played in a lot of 90s and early 2000s movies. He played in Romeo Must Die, that included Aaliyah. He played Aaliyah's dad in that movie. And when I was like reading his story, I did not know he was British. So you guys know how like Idris Elba, he's not in this movie, but you guys know how Idris Elba is British, and a lot of people didn't know that he was British till he started doing interviews in his British accent. Well, Delroy Lindo is British. I did not know he was born in Great Britain. I didn't know that he was Jamaican, and I didn't know, that he was a British Jamaican man who's been acting in all these movies. And, here I am thinking that he's, African American and whatnot, but he was, British. And then I find that to be cool. And that goes to show you how like fluid African blooded people are, and how fluid we are when it comes to our versatility. Because, in the past, a lot of people have complained, about people not being authentically placed in roles as far as movies, music videos, or whatever depiction it is that is garnered to the African American community. But the thing that I love about Black blooded people or about African descendant people is that we're very versatile. due to our culture and heritage being so varied, where we have ancestors from, West Africa, or ancestors from the Caribbean, ancestors who were of African descent in Europe, ancestors who were of African descent in the Caribbean or Latin America and whatnot. And with our background being so varied, we're able to be more fluid as to the type of roles that we can play. Because I've seen that, especially with Caribbean actors and actresses, African actors and actresses, and European, African descended actors and actresses. So I find that to be very cool how we're just able to be so versatile and blend in really well. So moving right along from that, then we get down to the white lady, who is Smoke's ex-girlfriend, ex-boo thing, ex-shack up buddy, whatever you want to call her. She kinda irked my nerves a little bit, because I'm saying, like, "You need to go on somewhere." And that's what, Smoke told her. He said, "We're not together no more. We don't have nothing going on, so I don't know what it is that you trying to do or what you trying to get from me." And she just kept trying to, get his attention by saying, "My mom died, and you didn't even come to see about me and what was going on with her and blah, blah, blah." And then, she pretty much said, "Well, I'm a black person too," when she wanted to be a part of the juke joint and whatnot, because they wanted the juke joint, to be a place for them. And at that time, as blacks, we had to create our own spaces, because at the time, I believe the movie took place in like pre or like post Jim Crow era. And at the time, the southern United States, especially the deep south like Mississippi, it was still very thick, with racism. So black people couldn't really go to too many spaces, because it was deemed, white only. So they had to create their own spaces for them to have fun and to talk and socialize and procreate or whatever it is they wanted to do, just how a lot of blacks had to do with the church. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to look up the name of the character in the movie and the actress's name. Okay, so her name is Mary, but she was played by Haley Steinfeld. So Mary pretty much said, "I'm down with blacks. I'm black too, because my mother's father was half black, half white. So, my granddad was half black and half white. And at that time, that's when they still kind of, measured people's blackness, because you had the octoroon and the quadroon and the mulatto. Mulatto is what we would consider biracial. A quadroon is somebody who had like one fourth black blood in them, which means that they had a grandparent that was black, but the other three grandparents they had were of other races or were white. And in this scenario, Mary would be considered an octoroon, where she's like one eighth black, because her great grandfather, I think she said, was half black. So it's obvious, as white as she looked in the movie, that everybody else in their family seemed to, married or shacked up with white people, and that's how she came about. But, she tried to pull that whole thing too. And one thing I found interesting about her character was that the actress who played her, Haley Steinfeld, is part black, just like the character is. Because I read in her bio that her her father is Jewish and her mother is part Filipino. And she said that her maternal grandfather, which means her mother's dad, is half Filipino and half black. So since her mother, and this is real life, so since her mother is pretty much half Filipino, half black, whomever her grandfather married, and I assume they were white, because when you look at her, she looks predominantly white except with a hint or Asian. She would be considered a quadroon. So she would be one fourth black, because her grandfather is half black and half Filipino. So her grandfather is pretty much Blasian, half black, half Filipino. Whomever he married was white. So her mother would pretty much be multiracial or mixed. And since her father is Jewish, white Jewish, she would just be considered, a white woman technically, but if you want to be technical, she would be considered like a quadroon because of the half blackness of her grandfather on her mother's side. He's half black and half Filipino. But I found it interesting that he picked a character whose real life ethnicity matches so well, almost to a T, with the character's ethnicity. And a lot of people was pretty much saying that's how like a lot of people of color kind of get into the black community by pulling, oh, well, my grandfather is black, or oh, well, I'm black, blah blah blah. I want to say I've seen this more so with Latinos than I have with whites. I've never really seen too many white people try to like get involved with blacks based on ancestry. A lot of times I see whites trying to get involved with black people because they find us cool. Or, we're just a vibe at the time. But with Latinos, I've noticed they tend to say, well, I'm black too. My grandmother was black, blah, 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 blah. So I'm pretty much black and I could say nigga and do whatever, whatever. But, they claim black, sometimes, but they don't respect black people or blackness within itself. So that's pretty much what I saw with that. So moving right along to the juke joint. I love how the juke joint got started. I loved how the people were dancing, but I really love how Ryan Coogler intertwined the